What if the most powerful laptop you could buy didn't run Windows at all? Not as a niche experiment or a developer side project, but as a serious, high-performance machine from one of the biggest names in the PC industry. That's the shift Dell has been quietly pushing forward with its Linux-powered systems, especially in its premium XPS and Precision lines. And if you understand what's really happening here, you start to see why this matters far beyond one laptop or one company. This is about control over computing, about where performance actually comes from, and about how Microsoft's long-standing grip on the PC world is being challenged in a subtle yet significant way. Dell didn't suddenly turn its back on Windows. For decades, Windows has been the default operating system across its devices, from consumer laptops to enterprise workstations. Microsoft built an ecosystem that became deeply embedded in business workflows, education systems, and everyday computing. That kind of dominance doesn't disappear overnight. But while Windows remained the public-facing standard, Dell was quietly investing in something else in the background. Through its Developer Edition program, it began offering laptops preloaded with Ubuntu Linux, designed specifically for developers and technical users seeking a different experience. This wasn't a casual experiment. Dell worked closely with Canonical, the company behind Ubuntu, to make sure the hardware and software were fully optimized to work together. That collaboration addressed one of the biggest historical problems with Linux on laptops, which was inconsistent hardware support. Users often had to deal with broken drivers, unreliable power management, or components that simply didn't work as expected. Dell's approach removed that friction. Instead of forcing users to install Linux themselves and troubleshoot everything manually, it delivered machines where Linux was stable, supported, and ready to use from the moment you turned them on. The real shift began when Dell stopped treating Linux as a secondary option and started pairing it with its most advanced hardware. Its XPS Developer Edition laptops and Precision workstations began offering the same high-end processors, fast storage, and premium build quality that Windows users were getting. These weren't stripped-down alternatives. They were flagship-level systems designed to handle demanding workloads, and in many cases, customers could choose Linux instead of Windows at the point of purchase, sometimes at a slightly lower cost because the Windows license wasn't included. From a performance perspective, Linux brings a different set of strengths. It generally uses fewer system resources, which means more of the machine's power is available for actual tasks rather than background processes. For developers, it aligns more closely with the environments where their code will eventually run, especially in cloud and server-based systems. It also offers deeper control over how the system behaves, allowing users to customize and optimize their setup in ways that aren't always possible on Windows. These advantages have been well known in technical circles for years, but what Dell did was package them into a polished, mainstream product that didn't feel experimental. To understand why this matters, you have to look at Microsoft's position in the industry with a bit more precision. Windows has been the backbone of personal computing for decades, shaping not just how people use computers, but how entire organizations operate. It isn't simply an operating system sitting on a device. It functions as a gateway into a tightly integrated ecosystem that includes productivity software, enterprise management tools, identity systems, and cloud services. For a long time, that ecosystem created a kind of gravitational pull. Once a company or user was inside it, leaving became difficult, expensive, and often unnecessary, but that level of control depends on one key assumption, that the operating system on the local machine is central to how work gets done. And that assumption has been slowly weakening. The shift hasn't been sudden or disruptive in an obvious way. Instead, it has been driven by structural changes in how software is built and deployed. Increasingly, applications are no longer tied to a specific desktop environment. They run in browsers, in containers, or on remote servers accessed through APIs. In that model, the local operating system matters less than it used to. This is where Linux starts to gain ground. In cloud environments, Linux dominates. The vast majority of servers powering modern applications, from web platforms to data pipelines, run on Linux-based systems. Developers are writing code, testing it, and deploying it in environments that are fundamentally Linux first. Over time, that creates a mismatch if their local machines are running something different. Even small inconsistencies between development and production environments can introduce friction, bugs, or inefficiencies. That changes the equation in a very practical way. When your production environment runs on Linux, developing on Linux becomes the most straightforward path. It reduces the need for translation layers, minimizes compatibility issues, and allows developers to work in conditions that closely mirror where their code will ultimately run. This is why many developers historically chose to install Linux manually on their laptops, despite the inconvenience. They were optimizing for workflow efficiency, even if it meant dealing with setup complexity and potential hardware issues. What Dell has done is remove that barrier. By offering Linux pre-installed on high-end machines, fully supported and optimized, it transforms what used to be a technical workaround into a standard option. The decision shifts from "can I make this work?" to "do I want this configuration?" That's a subtle but important change, because it lowers the threshold for adoption. It makes Linux accessible not just to enthusiasts, but to professionals who value stability and convenience alongside performance. There's also an economic dimension that becomes more relevant at scale. When manufacturers ship devices with Windows, they pay licensing fees that are incorporated into the overall cost structure. Those costs may not be immediately visible to end users, but they are very real, especially for organizations purchasing hardware in large volumes. With Linux, that layer is different. There isn't a comparable licensing model in the same sense, which gives manufacturers and buyers more flexibility in how systems are priced and deployed. For individual consumers, the difference might seem marginal. But for enterprises ordering hundreds or thousands of machines, even modest savings per unit can add up quickly. Beyond direct cost, there are also indirect efficiencies. Pre-configured Linux systems reduce the need for Linux systems. Manual setup, standardized environments across teams, and simplify maintenance in workflows that are already Linux-centric. These operational advantages can be just as important as the upfront price difference. At the same time, the types of workloads that benefit most from Linux are no longer confined to specialized roles. Software development has expanded across industries, data analysis is embedded in decision-making processes, and artificial intelligence has moved from research labs into mainstream business applications. All of these areas rely heavily on Linux-based tools and infrastructure. This isn't a fringe trend. It reflects how modern computing is being built from the ground up. As a result, demand is shifting in a way that aligns with these realities. Users who depend on these workloads are looking for systems that integrate seamlessly into their environments without requiring additional configuration. Dell's Linux-powered laptops are positioned to meet that demand by combining high-end hardware with an operating system that matches the direction of modern computing. That alignment is what makes this development significant, because it connects changes at the infrastructure level with choices being made at the device level. None of this means Linux is universally better than Windows. The reality is more nuanced. Windows still dominates in areas like gaming and certain creative applications, particularly those tied to specific software ecosystems. Many enterprise environments also rely on legacy applications that are built specifically for Windows. For those use cases, Windows remains the more practical choice. What's changing isn't that one operating system is replacing the other, but that the market is becoming more segmented. Different users have different priorities, and the industry is starting to reflect that more clearly. The segment where this shift is most visible is among power users. Developers, engineers, data scientists, and cybersecurity professionals often prioritize performance, flexibility, and alignment with their working environment over convenience. These users are influential within organizations. They recommend tools, shape workflows, and often determine what hardware and software gets adopted at a team level. When this group starts choosing Linux-first machines from major manufacturers, it signals a deeper change in how decisions are being made. Microsoft is fully aware of this shift, and its response has been strategic rather than defensive. Instead of trying to push users away from Linux, it has integrated Linux into its own ecosystem. The Windows subsystem for Linux allows users to run a Linux environment directly within Windows, bridging the gap between the two worlds. Microsoft's Azure Cloud Platform also supports Linux extensively, reflecting the reality that a large portion of modern workloads depend on it. Even development tools like Visual Studio Code have been designed to work seamlessly across operating systems. This approach shows that the competition is no longer about forcing users to choose one operating system over another. It's about staying relevant regardless of what users choose. Microsoft is positioning itself as a provider of tools and services that work across platforms, rather than relying solely on Windows as the central pillar of its strategy. That's a significant shift from its earlier approach, and it highlights how the industry is evolving. So when people say Dell humiliated Microsoft, it's not about a single product launch or a dramatic moment of disruption. It's about what that launch represents. Dell has shown that high-performance laptops don't need to rely on Windows to be viable. It has demonstrated that Linux can be delivered as a polished, mainstream option rather than a technical afterthought. And it has responded to a growing demand from users who want more control over their computing environment. To put this into perspective, consider a hypothetical scenario. A company is setting up a new engineering team and needs to equip them with laptops. In the past, the default choice would almost certainly have been Windows machines, with developers configuring their environments individually. Today, that company has another option. It can order systems with Linux pre-installed, fully supported, and optimized for its workflows. That reduces setup time, improves consistency, and aligns the development environment more closely with production systems. This isn't a distant possibility, it's a practical decision that organizations are already making. The broader implication is that the role of the operating system is changing. It used to define the machine. Now it's becoming more of a layer that sits on top of increasingly flexible hardware. Users are starting to see it as a choice rather than a limitation. That shift may seem subtle, but it has long-term consequences for how the industry operates. When users feel less locked into a specific ecosystem, it creates space for alternatives to grow. Windows still holds a dominant position, and that isn't going to change quickly. Its installed base is enormous, and its integration into business environments is deeply entrenched. But dominance doesn't mean exclusivity. The presence of strong alternatives changes how companies compete, how products are designed, and how users make decisions. Dell's Linux-powered laptops are part of that broader shift, acting as a signal that the market is becoming more diverse. At its core, this comes down to a balance between convenience and control. Windows offers a familiar experience, wide compatibility, and a vast range of software. Linux offers efficiency, customization, and a level of transparency that appeals to technical users. Neither approach is inherently better for everyone. What's changing is that users now have more viable options at the high end of the market, where performance and reliability are critical. This is why the story matters. It's not about one company challenging another in a direct confrontation. It's about how the foundation of personal computing is evolving in response to new demands. Dell didn't dismantle Microsoft's position, but it did highlight something important. The assumption that powerful laptops must run Windows is no longer true, and once that assumption starts to fade, the entire industry begins to shift in ways that are gradual but meaningful. That shift won't happen overnight, and it won't affect every user in the same way. But it's already underway. And as more manufacturers explore similar strategies, and as more users become comfortable with alternatives, the balance of power in the PC world will continue to evolve. Not through sudden disruption, but through a steady redefinition of what users expect from their machines and the software that runs on them.